Hi, Bob.
Good morning, Froda.
Oh,
Good morning.
This is so weird. I can't see you guys. Oh, there you are. You're behind the Zoom window. Did you manage to coordinate with Vint, Bob?
Still working on that. I sent my phone number to him and you.
Did you get the long email with all his details?
Yes, and I think I'll be able to do it on when he's at the airport on the 8th. Yeah.
Okay, shall we just reply to that so he doesn't just have your hang on, I'll reply. Vint, it seems Bob will be able to see you at the airport.
I think that will work for me. And it depends on when he's there. I mean, if he comes, he just said the September 8th. So I don't know if he's going to be there all day, overnight on the 8th, or what. That wasn't clear. So I have to. I thought I'd phone him when he gets here.
Well, I mean, if you pick it up from the airport Marriott, then
yeah,
then I guess you can come anytime, right?
That's true. Yes, I thought I'd like to at least thank him in person, if that's possible. And I want to thank you, at least this way. Thank you very much for sending it. I'm excited to be using it, and of course Jim will also share in using it.
It will be interesting. Boom, sent. Yeah, yeah, it will be good. So, oh, suddenly people. Hello, people. I sent in the Twitter group, which of course not all of us are on, a link. I'm going to send it here now. Just give me a second. It's for the room we're looking at renting, and it's kind of relevant because I recorded 1 minute of 360 video in there. And I also uploaded in the Twitter group a 360 photograph, which is, of course, much higher quality. So I was wondering if maybe we could do something fun with the room itself. That could be interesting. And then I've been working on the categories that we discussed last time, and lots of issues similar to the Mark Anderson issues and the mural have come up. So that's a bit of a interesting learning curve that's been learned by people 1,000 times over, but interesting for us especially, I think.
Yes.
Is anyone looking at the 360?
How does one do that?
Oh, yeah, it's in the chat. I'll send you an email.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I had tried, was unable to.
Okay, mine comes up. Yeah.
Yeah, the video is actually easier to see online.
Oh dear.
So.
Well, that's really 19th century lineup, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's a bit intimidating.
Jim, are you the one who's having problems watching it, did you say?
Yes.
What happens when you try?
I tried twice quickly and didn't really pursue it. So I was not persistent, but I was unable to get it, yes.
But what happens when you try to play it on YouTube?
I've forgotten. Frodo, I'm in Southern California now, and I kind of left after trying it a few times, so I haven't been back to it since.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fine.
I'll try again and then get in touch with you if I can't.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's in the chat here if you want to click a link. It's not really important, but Fabian and Mark, you can see it, right?
Yeah, it's working. And indeed, the style is interesting, classical, traditional. So it would be funny to imagine having a bunch of your headset and I don't know what other geeky device in there talking about the future.
This is the room,
Yeah.
this is the stick position. Oh. Yes, I mean, it's a bit intimidating.
Right. Yeah. No, it's just it's kind of amazing to have some of these capture technologies now. Doing the 3D scanning of the room, I've started experimenting at home, but with my current very, very old iPhone, that's a joke. It's only 2 generations old. It just doesn't do it well enough. But I'm sure, but it's interesting to see these things happening, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the 11, and they're not coming up with 14 next week, right? Anyway,
Isn't it this week?
yeah.
I thought it was this week. Isn't the event on the 7th?
Oh yes, that's this week.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get one anyway because all the what do you call it, NFC, the thing that does all the payment chip stuff, has died on my 10, and it's suddenly become apparent how many things basically now demand to have that facility, and all sorts of things that sort of I didn't realize, but somehow in the background, if that bit's not working, I think it was due to unauthorized, I might add, battery change, but I think that's what killed it. So new phone time.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Okay, so there is something I want to share with you guys that I've done since last time, and that is show 2 aspects of it. Well, same thing, but where am I going? Confusing myself. Okay, so you can of course see, right?
Yes.
Just have to close that. So this is a I'm the kind of person who can't just say it's an implementation detail, because implementation is what I do. So where you put the buttons to me is hair pulling out, horribly difficult. So the current define concept dialog in author looks like this. The stuff in the lower left is what concerns us. So I'm thinking about maybe changing it to be this. So the categories are still there, but you can now add something we call date, time, or timeline, I don't know, and category. Basic categories can be these types of things. Of course, that's up for discussion, and of course, people should be able to add their own, and that's a huge kettle of fish right there. To add the date, that could be done in such an explicit dialogue. This is basically Twitter's date dialogue that I just took screenshots of, because it has time zone, which I wasn't thinking about, and it has you can easily do it only one date or more. So this is an example of what it looks like filled in. Obviously, this is all messed up. So category person, of course, it's not actually person. The references below are as they are now, but what I wanted to highlight is the timeline using a dash. That means it is between these 2 periods of time. And these 2 periods of time can be filled in many different ways. For instance, if we go to, for Dave Millard, because I'm just mocking it up here. So for Dave Millard, he's a person. I don't know when he was born, and I'm not going to ask him, so I just leave that empty. But if we then do something like Doug Engelbart, unfortunately, he has a full timeline from birth until passing. So that little line here does all of that. So I'm just wondering if we use that kind of basic logic for dates, if that would be enough. But then the interesting thing for me anyway, having only done a few of these, I decided, without actually dealing with the concepts at all, they're random here in this screenshot from yesterday, I decided to do the columns by time and then the categories by row. And instantly we can see the problem. Like the people at the bottom, Jacob Hazelgrove, Wendy Hall, they won't fit on the timeline if they're 1 by 1, right? That's either going to be squashed or they'll have to be a bit above and below. So instantly this is going into mural territory. it is not just a linear plot. There needs to be some sort of basic editorial layout. And if you look at the real one that I have now, I've started with, these are Engelbart concepts. Obviously, they all link to Doug. And the italic ones are just headings. They don't actually have any definitions, but you see, it's an okay working space, but many things like, there's a problem now, so I had to do it this way. What do we call augmented copy?
What is it? Let's see. Is what the method of copying text from one location and pasting it with additional metadata, such as high resolution as in primary. I don't know what you call it.
No, exactly. There's quite a few that, you know, bootstrapping, that is really a Doug Engelbart concept, which I call it here. So, but a lot of them don't really fit nicely with these categories. Peter.
Yeah, what I would think is to use the unfolding concept. If there are a bunch of names that are going to be visually scrunched together, instead replace it with those, you know, a little pill graphic that says 6 people. And then if you click on the 6 people, that could expand out into a space where you can see all the names comfortably spaced.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting approach.
Well, there's another possible, you know, as I mentioned very briefly the last time, is that the actual dates on the timeline in information murals are frequently stretched in different ways.
Yeah,
that is, if you got a lot of dates around I don't know, 1920 to 1930, you make a little more space there between 1920 and 1930, and you put the names in. People I've experienced at least have no difficulty with that.
no, absolutely. I think that's a good approach too. But you know, a mural versus a timeline are not the same thing, because a timeline is really about the time. But still, so many interesting questions come up. Here's one. So the example we used last week, carbon copy, right? Carbon copy paper. If we put that in here, carbon copy still exists. It was invented. So in that case, what I would probably put is the invention date and then a line to indicate that it's still active, just like a human is still alive. And that's probably okay then to put that on the timeline at the time of invention. But what about a person? Do you put their name where they died, when they were born, or in the middle, systematically, or can you do that yourself? I mean, does that have to be done like a mural, curated?
Oh, here's another thought. If we were thinking in VR terms, we could simply put all those names on a pane 90 degrees to the timeline pane. So you could just sort of rotate out into the name dimension and have all the names laid out nicely. But from a head-on view, you just see like a little tiny little vertical line representing each one of the names. Then, you know, swing out around, and as you come around, then suddenly you'd be able to read the names. Otherwise, they'd all get compacted into a straight line.
Yeah, I like that idea. Though, of course, if the timeline text is being billboarded, it'll keep turning around to show you the end on. But not that notwithstanding that, I think that's sort of quite a nice idea and a useful way to use the extra dimension. I mean, because the difference is that, you know, the difference between effectively a fixed 2D timeline where you've designed it for clarity and you do exactly the things Bob has mentioned in terms of expanding parts, just become more, I've noticed, just become more difficult dynamically. They're easy in the mind's eye, but actually when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, it just gets very messy. And timelines are almost invariably lumpy in their content. Things just don't occur in a nice, evenly distributed in a distributed form. So you almost want to work from the get-go that all the things are going to end up on top of one another. And then it does take us into the territory of things like, so Peter's just suggested, how we deconflict that, because the methods that we might use in a static, effectively print era method may not, I stress may not necessarily work in a dynamic digital environment.
If the
When I say may not work, they may be more difficult to implement than we imagine.
yeah, well, those are maybes. We don't know. To answer, at least give my answer to Proda's question, I would put the name of the inventor where at the time of the invention, because if the mural is about inventions, or the time, if the timeline, and if the timeline is about inventions, either one.
Well, I'm looking at the end of our discussion last time where you don't have fields for everything. So you don't have the full rich thing of item invented by and all of that. It would be two separate items. You would have the invention and then you would have the person. So if the person is mentioned in the invention definition, there will be a connection. But the problem is okay, here's a very related question. The map that you saw on my screen just now had clusters of Doug concepts and people, organizations clustered as I felt like it while working. That was not a timeline. But here's the thing. Should a timeline be a separate view or should be a toggle for that kind of a view? That's an interesting question too. And also we tend to do timelines from left to right. Maybe we should have them from top to bottom. Because
No.
Why not?
You should have them, for Western people, you would have them from left to right because that's how we think of time. For Israelis, you might have them, and people in the Middle East, you might have them going the opposite direction.
But we also have a timeline in book form going from top to bottom.
The top to bottom thing is
because we have them doesn't mean they are the way to choose to have them.
No, but it's
my observation is it crept in since the arrival of more people using phones. So the answer is just turn your phone sideways. If that's not too much. I don't mean to be trite, but I mean a lot of these things. What you actually see are people copying things like the Facebook phone scrollable timeline, and it goes vertically because that's the orientation of the phone, not because it's necessarily the best way to do it. And I'm not saying it has to be, but my instinctive feeling is any useful timeline I've interacted with has broadly gone across in time.
Yeah, and as Peter
so are you going to do virtual reality, and you're going to constrain virtual reality with phones?
I don't think that's what Mark is saying. I think it's also similar to what Peter's saying, that you could do bottom to top, like geological layers. Like your mural behind you could actually be done going from bottom to top because you have those layers. That could be a useful way of looking at it. There are different ways to look at it. But one of the things is we're looking at your specific mural, Bob, but we're also looking at how we might do it for our book, how we might do the defined concepts. Should, in a curated mural, that would be wonderful by you. But also, if we're doing items that are on a timeline, that it should probably be generated automatically. So you could move things around if you want to, but at least things are in the right time automatically. Even that's quite tricky.
Well, you've got at least 3 or 4 different contexts there. And so I'm bowing out of the conversation until we specify the context.
Okay. Bob, you can't do this thing. You've done it before. You can't do that. I'm taking my football and going home. We can probably agree on a context here, right?
Well, specify your context then.
Rhoda, I'd argue it's a decision that's premature. I think I would agree with Bob's point that left to right makes primary sense. There are situations where it doesn't. So that implies, kind of like Mark's earlier suggestion, that you have an intermediary solution where you can select one or the other. Books, for example, are schizophrenic. They're top to bottom on the page, and they're left to right in terms of page numbering. So it just seems to me that worrying about that now is premature.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. But I do think there are, in terms of Bob's point about context, there are at least two that we need to think about. One is an automatic layout, another one is a curated layout. And if we have defined concepts with some additional metadata like time, then they should at least be toggleable into a view that is that timeline. But in that timeline, we instantly get issues of, like we just discussed, if things don't fit, do we make it taller per row? So, you know, you can have more per item. You know, how do we deal with that? And then also there's that question of, a lot of things last a long time. Do you have a bar for all of them? Or do you only have the beginning or the end point?
You're clarifying the discussion into automated versus curated timelines. I think it's a very good question, which answers itself, because an automated timeline means that decisions are going to be made by algorithms, when I would guess, I've done very little of what Bob has done in terms of his information murals, but there are 100,000 decisions involved in the mural that's behind him, which involves judgment, where the answer to the question always is, it depends. And it takes, I would argue that for a long, long while, AI is not going to be able to really address more complex, it depends questions. Bob already has in the last 10 or 15 years. So that, to me, your curated alternative, to me, is the only viable one, because the chance of automated working is 0.1%. And it's hard enough to do it, you know, at the human level, where one person is making those 100,000 decisions.
Well, the algorithm is where the decisions go in, of course. So it's a matter of designing the algorithm. But I'm wondering, for the book that we are all doing now, the third volume of The Future of Text, one of the things we could easily do is do a little defined concept per person who was involved. So at least we have birth dates, and we are all at least persons. So that, along with all the other things on a timeline, would be interesting. Because if it is a basic layout on a timeline, I mean, we're all alive at this point, so it's not exactly that kind of rocket science. Then we can start looking into what different people have written and see how things connect and so on. But at least we have a spine along which to put things, right?
The context. I don't know if you're talking about the book on the internet or a book printed.
I don't care about paper at all, apart from as a long-term storage medium. Sorry, I don't know who this is. I'll have to take it. I apologize. I'll be quick.
Bob, oh well, I was going to clarify. The point I was making about the orientation was simply that vertical timelines became much more popular when more people started using phones, and people like Facebook, which was a big thing at the time when phones were becoming popular, started using phone-oriented space for a timeline. Now, if you're holding a phone and it's taller than it's broad, it sort of makes sense to use that. If you're rotate. If you on a computer screen, a laptop or a desktop, it's broadly the other orientation, and you get better use of space. And in fact, interestingly, I just been going back and look at a couple of books I've got with a lot of past pre-digital timelines. The reality is actually they normally use whatever makes space for the page format, page in the loosest sense, broadly the bit of paper it was printed on. So it's not as if there is a right way. It's most efficient use of space, and actually it's perfectly possible with a phone. I mean, you think it has. You can hold a phone like this. People tend to forget and have the same. If you did a scroll like that, then you'd have more timeline information, and it would probably be better. So this sense of orientation is again a slight contrivance.
It makes a lot of sense. But just so I don't bulldoze the conversation here, is there a feeling that we should spend part of the time discussing how we can do some things in our book based on who we are and the key topics, and that data should be organized in a nice way, simple way, so that it's an extensible system, and then see how that could be interesting in VR? Because I do agree with Jim's earlier comment that we're, getting a bit ahead of ourselves, because if we don't know what's going to be useful to look at, it doesn't matter details of what we put in there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that I would really, really like is to have the view spec toggle opportunity in VR. So if Bob is willing, I think it would be incredible to have a mural curated by him off the symposium, off the book, but have this, a lot of the same, not all of the same, a lot of the same, snap your fingers, as it were, and now it's a basic timeline of everything in the book that has been given a time. Snap your fingers again. It may be about concept, so you have a few views, including the human one, but also going into different ones, because once we have that depth, like Peter said about, having the words like that, we can experiment a lot. I mean, Fabien, if we give you this data, do you want to build stuff with it? It should be quite stable data once we have it.
No. No, the thing is, yes, I want to, but I don't want to promise. And I want to. That's a little bit. I think I mentioned it at some point that that's the annoying side of prototypist. Is like, yeah, I'm hard to work with for a lot of different reasons, but mostly because I like to do whatever I want, whenever I want. And if I start to promise I'll do this, I promise to tinker with it, but I can't. I'm happy to do so, but I can't promise anything interesting can come out of it. So that's a little bit the annoying part.
I think that's absolutely fine, and I think that honesty is really, really important, because it's easy to overpromise. Because it's a shame that Brandel is not here today either, because what he's doing in 3D with Bob's mural is he's making something very beautiful and impressive, but he is also making further decisions that Bob may or may not agree with. So there's another level of editorializing. So that's why it will be interesting to play around with, as Jim said, the algorithm for how these things should be shown simply. I mean, it could be such a waste of time. It could be so silly, so useless, but that in itself would warrant a brief article in our book saying, we tried this, here's a few screenshots. It's absolute rubbish. That has value for other people, as well as, oh my God, this is the best way to learn things. You can't make a map if all you do is note down the scenic bits. Yeah,
I
should make that a t-shirt.
Just to go back on because it loops back to the question you asked last time also about, let's say, if there was such data, how would I integrate it? I think it has to be both bringing it verbatim, just like Bob designed it, because it's this way for a reason, but also allowing to edit it or poke at it or do something with it, because otherwise it's just displaying it. And this we've already done it. Like we convert to an image, we display that image, and that's it. So that's not interesting anymore. It was the start, and we've done it. It was interesting, but so there is this part where we've seen it. So we must be able to find interesting interactions from that.
A quick one, actually, two things with Fabian really. One is I'd be very interested to know, even just from your sort of thinking rather than necessarily making anything, vis-a-vis timelines, what either you think strikes you as still sort of too confusing. So in other words, what's easy and what's difficult. Where dynamic timeline apps, they're normally JavaScript libraries, nearly all of them. Basically, they all fail at the same point because they can't automatically deal with the lumpiness of the data, and so they just give up and fail in bad ways. And so I don't know anyone's really got the answer for that yet. I mean, the other thing is that in terms of doing just what you mentioned and making more with say the data that's in the Narix mural there. Well, all the text is already available in JSON form. The one bit I know is missing, and if someone would give me a good suggestion as to how to do it, it just needs mapping. And I just don't know what resolution or whether but basically what I work in to go and define effectively a click target for all of those. But it seems to me if that JSON's dataset had that, then you'd have much of what you're talking about, and I could always enrich it with links to extracted images, or we could experiment with how and if that fails. In terms of the text, we're probably sort of 90% of the way there. I mean, there's a good few hours of just the drudge work of defining the bounding boxes, but I don't think that's a easily automatable task for much of the mural, except the stuff that's in clearly defined boxes.
So to, let's say, make it editable or manageable, even the text itself is not necessarily required. Like each of the piece of text could still be an image. It would still be fine because this would preserve the layout of that specific box. Because if it's just I mean, if it's a JSON string and we don't know what constraint have been applied, let's say fit within that box of such dimension, then we might end up, let's say, having very long strings. And yeah, that's going to basically break the layout. So, and maybe it's and I think editing text in VR, like for example, pointing at a piece of text and selecting and moving and grabbing, let's say, characters out of the word. I don't know how to do this. I know it's feasible, but I don't think it's trivial, especially when you have like a significant amount of text. So my initial reaction would be going from the mural as one image to the mural of, let's say, 100 images, more or less, that have, of course, automatically a size, but also to have their position. So, for example, if I look at the arrows there, then I know there are those big arrow on the top right. Then I can just reapply them there. But all of this would be grabbable or interactable, basically. And I think that, yeah, that would be the easiest step towards something interactive while preserving initially the layout.
Yeah. To be clear, I mean, when I made the JSON for it, I wasn't assuming that would actually be used on screen. My thought was that the missing bit is the clickable target that says basically when you interact with, however you do it in VR or whatever, with the mural, at this point, the relevant information is now this blob of JSON. Now, what you do with it is entirely then up to the virtual agent that's working with it. My intent at this point was simply to say that, right, the thing that you just pointed or clicked had this screen text, and I added a bit of extracted metadata, like it's on this layer of the diagram, and one or two odd things. And if there was a reference, I've sort of included that in there. Thinking along the lines of somebody mentioned, you might in a VR, you might click on a mural, and you might get a little palette of symbols coming up. You know, do you want to look up more information about this? Do you want to see this strand of data redone? And the JSON was just an attempt to do that. The only bit that's not there at the moment is the effect of the image map layer of it that says this data object refers to this part of the map. And I'm still unclear as to the best and quickest way to do that, bearing in mind there are hundreds of them to do. So it's not, and there isn't an automatic process as far as I'm concerned that will do that for us.
So if it's, they might be, so if you have an automated way that goes from, let's say, the mural in the source file to an SVG or to a bunch of raster images, with their position, then basically if you have the position of each item and you have its dimension, then you have a bounding box. And if you have a bounding box, even though it might be, let's say, with an offset when you're in VR, if you move the whole mural one there, then you would just offset, but basically you would be able to go from an action, so it gives you coordinates in space, to being able to know if it's within that bounding box or not. So that should be sufficient. Again, it's that assume, let's say this part of JSON with the text has also coordinates. Let's say that's with a reference, let's say 0, 0 for the top left corner, and I don't know, 2000, 1000 for the bottom right. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. But as long as it's coherent and there is one way to translate, then we can offset to whatever position in space or even rotate. And yeah, if we do an action, then we know we're within a bounding box.
Because I also thought if it's scalable, then it means that if we do something like, you know, pinch the virtual mural and, you know, bring two halves together, the SV, because it sort of can be computable, that layer would then know that, right, all those things in the middle are no longer visible. I mean, they've temporarily disappeared from view because we've taken, you know, this much of the left side and this much of the right side and just smushed them together, and that is now, as it were, the visible interactive plane.
But I think that comes after. Let's say we first do the normal layout, let's say, and then some interaction to it, and then being able to keep some provenance or the way that this item was there would definitely be important, but still like a second step.
Sure.
So I just have a basic question here specifically for you, Fabian. I'm going to share screen. So what I've done, I've gone through just manually looking at a few of these things, exported it as a PDF, and most of them are messy, but can you read this? This is all it is. So the discussion is this the kind of glossary we want? Are these the two types of metadata we need? I really think we should aim for as simple as possible. I think there's agreement on that, but what do you think?
I may be a bit confused, but what's the, I can't really answer that without understanding the task it would be used for or within up.
Can you please repeat the question? I didn't hear you well.
What would be the usage of the glossary? Like
The usage,
how would one use it?
Yeah, that's exactly what I think we need to discuss. One thing is to put things on a timeline. So if you...
Sorry to interrupt, but that doesn't answer this, because you put it on a timeline, but what, again, same what for is use the timeline because you have some historical challenge, you're unsure, or you expect to find some gaps in your knowledge, but in a time-dependent fashion. Because I see what the timeline is, but like I'm wondering when is the last time I used it for a specific purpose.
Well, here is the timeline that we have in the first two volumes of the book. That is just a typed in timeline at the back where many of you have helped, particularly you, Bob. Lots of things like, you know, 1985 Amiga computer by Commodore. This specific timeline is to help primarily students in the future understand our field, the field of text stuff. So I thought that one use case would be whatever timeline you're looking at, and this could very well include a mural. You should then have the option of importing a curated timeline, for instance, this one, and have it not necessarily overlaid, but maybe underlaid or somehow related. So you can see things in that kind of context. Maybe you even have a personal timeline of your own life that you can always toggle on. So you can, when you see specific timeline, it's like, oh my gosh, that happened when I was at so and so, and whatever it might be. So it is what I'm trying to get to is how simply, because I really think we should aim for any average kind of knowledge worker making this themselves. I don't think it should be a huge engineering task. But I think timeline is one thing, and the second thing is category. And in this sense, these are meant so that you can, let's say you're reading this book and you say, show me all the sentences that discuss a name, which you can do now, but it's just not very accurate. Let's try this. Right? It does it. It's not exactly perfect, or a concept, or whatever you might be interested in. So it is to allow for view changes. But the question is, when would it be useful? I agree that that's the question. And that's why I think we need to prototype. Yes, Peter.
Yeah, I think a source field would be really useful, so that when I'm entering something, I could indicate where I found it. Could just be, comment from Mark, or the title of a book, or heard at conference, little cues like that.
Yeah, that's
because I have trouble. Sometimes I have trouble reconstructing the trail of how I got to something after the fact. And that trail could sometimes be useful, backtracking on the trail, then find other things that help me going forward.
I think, as usual, Peter, not as usual, as often, it sounds like you're talking completely left field and I don't have any clue. But what it sparks in my head is, I think a work in the future can have two curated views. One is the written book and the other one is the associated mural. Same underlying stuff, they relate to each other. But I think that from either one as a starting position, the user, reader, whatever, should be able to pull forth. That's one thing, but also, like you say, see a little bit of their own trails and see how things are connected. And we can get better help with that based on better underlying meta stuff, right? Bob, how interesting
I
is
agree.
Oh, you do?
I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't think there's a perfect metadata, and I don't think there's a perfect timeline, and I don't think there's a perfect description of a user. So the best we can do is to produce some and then see what happens.
Yes.
And that's curation, in my view.
I completely agree with you. So what's exciting here is you and me represent two different aspects of this. I represent I wish the user to be able to do what they want, manipulation, and you represent the real author. So I think the kind of dynamic of going between those two things will be interesting. And with the lack of perfection and metadata, I so strongly agree. And that's why I started messing about with it a bit. So, all I've done now, because I don't have access to my programmer because I just don't have the money. So I haven't done it programmatically where you just click on things, you just type the whole thing manually. So if you guys feel like there are some terms that you want to define in this, or if you want to send me author profiles or your own, that would be really, really good fun, because maybe we could export it either visual meta, of course, but it's internally stored as a JSON. So we could give a JSON to Fabienne and Brandel to see if they could somehow make that connect to the book and the mural. And then we can argue about the contents in these things, because you're right, they're not perfect, and how we argue will be important, right?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine if a simple scenario would be like this. Someone is reading this book in 30 years in the future. They have the most amazing headset or whatever you want to call it. They feel that they're reading a normal book. They come across the word bootstrapping. And through some interaction with that one word, they should be able to instantly find out about Doug. That shouldn't be too hard. But they should also be able to see where it fits in the normal timeline, and then go into a version of the timeline, Bob, that you made highlighting Doug, for instance, which is something you want, if you wanted to make that. And then from that timeline, they can see, excuse me, from that mural, they should be able to say, okay, I want to see Bob Horn's full mural of this whole work. And then it'll look as rich as what you have behind you. You know, these are the kinds of interactions I'm dreaming about. Because furthermore, let's say this person is a student. I would like a well-knowledged, not a word, but a good teacher to be able to enter that space and say, hang on, you haven't heard about Ted Nelson? And then very easily be able to put those two people up and see those connections in the general world, but also in the work that we as a community have been writing about these two guys. On the 7th this week, with Apple announcing new stuff, is also the first day Edgar goes to school. So it's a monumental day for a lot of people and personally. And obviously, we all want the next generation to have a better knowledge worlds, don't we? Oh, one more thing. One more thing. This comes into the provocation of our dear friend Brendel, who's not here. We may listen to this later. I made a really brief video this week, and I'm going to play it for you. It's 2 minutes. I'm going to turn the volume off and just speak it. And it is something that you know, but there's a reason why I want you to see this. So I came across this. I'll play it from the beginning. Ostensibly, this video is just about citing using copy and paste, right? So the reason is I came across a document on nature.com that was kind of neat. So I downloaded it, opened it in Reader. And as you may know, if Reader finds a DOI, it'll assign Visual Meta to this document. So now I just copy something. Well, I'm talking about other stuff here, but anyway, so select a random bit of text. Copy that, go to the word processor, paste it. It's pasted as a citation, but it's still understood to be a citation. So for instance, I can make sure it's got quotes around it and all of that kind of stuff. It goes on a bit. But the reason I wanted to show you that now is Visual Meta is not just on the page, of course, it is also when you copy. So that's why it can be such a way to connect these worlds we just talked about. Just, yeah, wanted to show it. We don't have an explicit way yet to copy defined concepts / glossary terms, but there's no reason we can't do that, right? Everybody's thinking, that's nice. I hope.
Yeah, I think it'd be really helpful if we could copy and paste the glossary terms with Visual Meta.
We can copy and paste glossary terms in Author as of 2 weeks ago from one document to another. It's a bit imperfect, but it is there. So what I've been doing a little bit today is deleting a lot of glossary terms that aren't relevant to the book, but which were relevant to my thesis. You know, doing a bit of basic cleaning. But it is very, very rough stuff. It would be very good to take it in and out of a mural as well.
Do you happen to know, Fred? When Sir Jacob implemented that, I assume so. What's happening there is on the copy buffer. When you do a copy, there's additional sort of unseen information. So I'm thinking someone like Peter probably would be able to look at that suitable tool. There'll be a packet. Basically, there'll be an identifier of some of the stuff that's in that copy. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if you could pick that off. You basically need a copy, probably a copyboard viewer that shows you all the information. Do you follow me, Peter?
Yeah.
You know, they'll because when you move stuff backwards and forwards, through things like bookend and Devon thing, all that stuff's going on in the background. So I think it's a common metaphor. So probably other apps could, we just need to know what to look for on the clipboard, could probably pull that out and give additional reuse to visual meta, which is one of the things we're sort of trying to do. Yeah. It's just beyond, I don't have the technical skills to do it. I understand what needs doing, I just don't know how to do it.
It's actually quite hard. I had to look for quite a while to be able to extract everything on the clipboard. I was recommended a few apps, utilities that I used, but yes, that is basically it is the main text and then underneath is the BibTeX. But to extract it is not trivial, but it should be, and that should be something on the visual meta page to say.
I'd also just bring up a couple of things I put in the timeline with a sidebar note for them. I did post 2 links to timeline pages that do an element. They in fact, they both use Simile Timeline, which sadly is now a defunct / moribund MIT project that I think the funding ran out. And it was done just before HTML5 arrived, which is another reason no one wants to touch it. But one thing that's quite nice there, one is the King John thing I showed you in the past, where if you move along the timeline, you see him walk around the map. But in the timeline part, the timelines actually show a couple of scales. And the other link is the timeline of JFK's death, which was one of the sort of early examples that the people who made the library used it for. And there, there's a sort of main timeline of events, but then there's a sort of a more compressed time scale, which is the one they expect you to sort of scroll along to find. But that scale actually has a variable scale on it. So when you get into right at the moment of his assassination, it goes from sort of days to hours to minutes. So it is possible to do dynamic. Well, I say possible to do dynamically in the sense that somebody writes the metadata in the background to make it happen. Making it dynamic at the next level, where the user decides just where the zoom scale of the information is a different but cross-cutting element to getting the sort of richness of visualization we want.
Okay, I just dropped a link in the sidebar for the Electron Clipboard Access APIs. So it looks like we can use web technology to get into the clipboard and play around with the guts of it.
Oh, cool.
Interesting.
So we should be able to create an Electron app that can reach into an author document, pull out the author database, and also do interesting things with whatever author is leaving on the clipboard, and put stuff on the clipboard in preferred formats to make life easier for author.
Sorry, Edgar and Emily's just leaving. Okay, bye-bye. Yeah, I mean, to open up the clipboard is just really important. So thank you for that, Peter. It's not useful in and of itself. Could you maybe write a paragraph on how to make it useful for a developer? And I'll stick it on Visual Meta, the implementation page, maybe.
Okay, I'll give you that little thought and send you an email later on.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm thinking about an article I read the other day that Facebook has created an artificial intelligence program that is going to check all of the items in Wikipedia, all 7 million write-ups. Is going to check the facts and the quote the understandings. They allegedly are doing that now.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm only smiling, Bob, because having spent a large part of my doctoral research looking at Wikipedia, I'm thinking, yes. I think there are an awful lot of assumptions packed into Facebook. I mean, it's a laudable thing to do. Part of the problem is Wikipedia is a bit of a house of cards. When you get behind the curtain, because everyone contributes, they all contribute in their own way, in their own style, and the surface skein of it looks coherent, but behind the curtain, it's an absolute mess.
So
yes, I'm aware of that because I have an item, I guess, on Facebook. I mean, excuse me, on Wikipedia. Different people modify it. I have no idea. I've stopped looking at it. What's interesting to me is that someone there is able to do an awful lot of that, and presumably they will have since Wikipedia is encyclopedia, will have dates in it. In other words, there will be a timeline, which that algorithm is going to create.
Yeah,
there are some queries. I recall that there's somebody Wikidata, which is sort of Wikipedia's lesser known sister, but is increasingly being used. So one of the things they want to do is when you write a date in Wikipedia, what they actually want you to do is, instead of writing the date in Wikipedia source code, is you point to a database reference in Wikidata. Now, that's not very human-friendly way of writing Wikipedia, which puts people off submitting, but it does make for the sort of extraction and purposing that you're describing much more believably possible and controllable. And I think I'll have to go away and dig around. There are some people, I think, who've built a form of, I think there is a sort of timeline query that if you fire it at either Wikipedia or Wikidata with a subject, it will do its best to find all the stuff that relate to that and stick it on the timeline for you. I'll see if I can find that again.
Well, that would be interesting to see whether what it would compare with the timeline in Volume 2 of Future of Text, for one thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with this, but other than what you said at the end there, Mark, about finding specific stuff, I really think curated timelines are really important, because it isn't necessarily accurate, but more importantly, it's not necessarily relevant. So that's why, when you're sitting in front of the mural there, Bob, you keep visually reminding us that the stuff that is there for a reason. To put every single thing that happened in the last 20 years is a complete mess. But anyway, Fabian, I see you have your hand up. That was a hint.
Yep, thank you. No, I use Wikidata a bit, and it's also whenever you see like you do a search on Google or DuckDuckGo or whatnot or something generic, and then you have some little extra information. It's usually because on Wikipedia you have those information box. They don't actually use the text. Let's say if you have a person and they give the biography, then on the side you will have let's say birth date and date of death. That's going to be indeed harder to edit, not like natural language, but rather a specific format. And then you can go from those information box to a small database of Wikipedia. like an equivalent of it. And if you want to do something, let's say, computable, like a timeline or difference between, if there is an overlap between two different persons, at least on a time span perspective, that works relatively well. And I think the most interesting, it's a little bit like OpenStreetMap, is that if it's missing, you and your friends or colleagues can fill it up and then expect in a couple of hours or days that it will be then the correct information again. So in a kind of federated way to write back our shared database of knowledge, I think that's pretty valuable. And I don't remember, but Brendel did a timeline in VR a couple of months or if not years ago, based on Wikipedia and based on specific pages. So I imagine he either used that or he went look through date format, a bit like the person who showed us NLP Compromise last week or 2 weeks ago did. Yeah, if you can find patterns for dates, then you can, yeah, build your time based on that.
Yeah, but in terms of our specific effort now, we are soon going to have a symposium. And we want to show something in VR if we can. There are a few pieces we already have, of course. We definitely, okay, so I feel that murals are important for two reasons, at least. One, they look ridiculously simple when you think about VR. What a flat thing in 3D, and then you realize they're not. That is, it's such a seductive thing. Secondly, there's a lot of stuff in there that can go all over the place in different dimensions. So if we can try to make even a basic thing of what we're talking about, you know, that maybe Bob does a basic mural, you know, from the pre-delivered papers and a few other things, and then we can put it on timelines and stuff, just to show that you turn into different views. Or just show that, you know, there are so many things like, I don't know, but we kind of want to get our hands on it. So the question is, Fabian, the Mozilla tools, hubs and spoke and all of that stuff, can that somehow come into this? Because I don't mind putting in the work if I have the skills, for instance.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one thing that it's a quick win or an easy way to already provide a bit something new is if we go back to the mural, or it doesn't matter, it can be any document that has text in it, but can be not just one image, but let's say a dozen images or a dozen pieces. But I think images is the easiest. And some of those images do include text. Then we can display them back on, let's say, a wall in hubs, and then we can invite, let's say, people either on their desktop or in the headset to grab an object, let's say a piece of that image, and then move it around. So that's trivial to do, basically. But let me try to find a link, because I've done something related way back when. And the one thing that was on, in addition to this, let's say, were some layouts function where you have the images, but then you could, yeah, display horizontally or vertically or another way, let's say. So I'll try to show this, but yeah, using hubs, it's like drag and drop of a document, basically. But you wouldn't be able to select like text itself, like a sentence, for example, unless the sentence is already predefined as a document slice or piece or image, basically.
Fred, if you like, I found the URL that I, for some reason, can't paste in this timeline, the Wikidata timeline. If I can share it on screen, if that would help people.
Oh, you got it. Oh.
Yeah. So I put oddly, the query that is the URL is 14 over almost 1,500 characters long, and I think that's what's upsetting Zoom. It won't let me paste the URL, but the URL.text that's in the chat, if you download that, the URL I'm about to show you is in there. Let's just quickly share my screen. Yeah, I want that one. So hopefully you can see a timeline here. So this is a live query. I didn't write this. I don't even know how, I won't pretend to know how it works. But this is a query somebody has written, which is basically looking at hypertext systems and just pulling data out of Wikidata. And you can see there are also all the sorts of issues we've already identified. So you get, you get overlapping boxes and things. But to get back to the point that was really in my mind, raised by what Bob said about, well, people are going off and looking at doing this. Maybe this query could possibly be, leveraged by us if we wanted to show something. Essentially, I think it's just as long, in this case, as long as things you want are in Wikidata, possibly in Wikipedia, I'm not sure, then we might be able to do something. But that's it. I don't know if anyone's got any questions. I'm not sure I'll be able to answer them, but while it's on the screen, or I'll leave it up if people want to talk about it.
Well, it's very interesting that it shows one way of displaying a whole bunch of items that pile up between 1980 and 1990. I mean, that was one of the things that Rhoda was puzzling about earlier in the meeting.
Yeah, I'll email the URL, Bob.
Yeah. So Fabian, I see your link as well, which we definitely have to talk about. I think this is really worthwhile looking at, Mark, because it's rubbish. It really, no, there's a lot of technical effort, and I'm happy to go on recording saying that, because it's so curated, but you can't tell how or why what's on here. It's like, why is note cards on here, and why is Ted Nelson just 1960 Project Xanadu? It doesn't have much meaning, and it doesn't have a
well, in fairness, there's no title on this. I did say it's about hypertext systems, so note cards in there because it's a hypertext system.
No, I'm not criticizing it to be a horrible person. I'm criticizing it from the perspective, same as you, let's not say criticize, critiqued the mural, right? There are so many issues in timelines. Timelines are really, really important, but this one shows, as you've already said, a lot of problems with a 2D flat timeline. So I think it's really, really.
What's the problem? What's the problem with Nelson in 1980?
It just,
for you.
Well, first of all, why is it important to have January 1 written when you can follow the dot up and you can see where it is anyway, right? There are so many questions of why specific layouts rules were used, and why is there an icon next to Project Xanadu when clearly it's blue and it's a link? Was it only Ted Nelson who worked on this? What is the highlight? Is it Ted or Project Xanadu? And then we look at Intermedia with Norman Meyerowitz and so on. I think what it shows is the need to be able to toggle lots of different view specs, like turn on and off people, because people can be the most crucial thing you're looking at, or it can be noise. If you're only interested in what software, Intermedia, Inquire, and all of that stuff, you can click into.
Please don't change it. Wait.
Sorry, I was just answering.
Please don't change it while we're
okay.
Considering one particular thing in it.
Just showing you that. So Fred was asking what the blue bits are. Basically, they just point to Wikidata articles.
Yeah. No, exactly. They're linked. So I'm saying this is such a great example of, if we are given the resources and invest the time and effort, these are the problems we should solve, especially in a virtual environment. We should have, because one of the key things we keep talking about in VR is not whether something is 3D, because if you take this cup, a cup has been rendered in 3D for decades, obviously on a 2D screen. But you have to click things to move it around is one thing. But if it's VR, you just move your head. So there's so many exciting things we can do here.
But this is a display for the user. I'm a user. I'm looking at Ted Nelson and so forth in that box. Tell me how you would change it.
It's not about what I would change, but it's what I would like to allow you as a user to change. If you are interested in Ted Nelson's work, you'd probably spend 2 or 3 minutes on a timeline, and then you will go read articles about Ted or watch videos. If you wanted to, the reason to look at a timeline, to say the obvious, to kind of remind myself and everyone, is to see how things relate in time. So time is the chosen primary medium. So what we really want to find out here is, did someone invent something before someone else? How did things progress? And one of the things that's really great from the analysis that Mark has done of the hypertext papers is to show when the field stagnated, right? Things didn't happen for a while. So that's the Sherlock Holmes, the case of the dog that didn't bark. There are many years where nothing's happening, and that has real meaning for us. So we have chosen to bring forth time as the key dimension. So that is why when we looked at the little defined concepts, the other one, categories, could be a mess of all kinds of crap, or if we constrain ourselves, could be very useful. Like maybe you only want to know about people, and then you could see them on a timeline, sure, but you can also have connections based on who has cited who, or you can have connections based on who was it, what institution, when. So the key is the interactions, that you should constantly be able to change that. Because as a PhD student, I found out a lot of stuff by talking to primarily Mark, who was ahead of me, about what really happened there and so on. And he would tell me, oh yeah, that paper so-and-so, but don't forget, he was at the same university as this other person who wrote this paper. Maybe they had a chat. That's the kind of interaction I want to give the user. And personally, I would like it to be like you're moving your hands to change things, not pressing buttons. So it becomes sculptural, like, hide this, pull this out. But of course, to do that, we need the metadata. Thanks for the question there, Bob. I got a lot of
the problem. I think that the missing thing in your whole several paragraphs of description, the missing thing is, for me, in using a timeline, is not only when did something happen, but what was important. What was important.
Yes.
And
yes.
This timeline, to some degree, confuses me, because I can't tell that Ted Nelson is more important than Don Hopkins and Ben Schneiderman.
Well, this is the point, Bob, and that is why it's so good to have you
Well,
here.
then you should say it. Then you should say it, in your answer, rather than,
Trying as much as I can, but
all right. Well, I'm just saying, it's the most important things that we want to have indicated there, and that's what you want to be. I want to have on timelines, because if the timeline, everything is the same over a period, and it's all different kinds of things mixed in together there, then there's a bunch of different things which I've never heard of before.
But okay, Bob, when you say that are important, this is really the key.
Yeah.
That's what I talk about, two things. That's why I talk about interactions, but also curated timelines. Because for you may have an interest right now in Ted Nelson. Your interest in Ted Nelson would be very, very different from someone who is interested in Hollywood, one who is reading about Ted's mother, Celeste Nelson, right? And that's really, really key. And that's why I think it is so important that just like you can curate a mural, you should also be able to curate a timeline in terms of emphasis, what's on there, and all of this stuff, so that I can say, while I'm looking at this, hang on, I know Bob, I trust Bob, he understands computer history. I want to see Bob's view of this timeline. But there is no inherent more important than other things. I think it's really depending on perspective. And of course, view spec means changing perspective. I want to load the special Bob view or the Peter Wasilko view. You will have different views of things, but they'll both be interesting while learning the field. And that's why we need the little boxes with metadata, and the metadata will be different depending on how it was created. And that's not a bad thing. We just have to allow for the interactions for that to be a benefit rather than an annoyance. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
By the way, I've emailed the URL to everyone now. I sent it to Bob, but I figured I might as well, because it's such a frank URL, all 1,400 plus characters. And just because Fabian has his hand up, just to say, just let me know when you want me to stop sharing this this picture, Fabian.
Mm-hmm.
I think it goes a little bit. Let's say doing the mural as something interactive, or this timeline being a good or a bad timeline. To me, the initial reaction is always I want it as a starting point because it's been curated by somebody I trust, let's say, or even that I don't trust, but then I can challenge it. And then I want to be basically a diff between what I know and what is there, so that I get the surprises, let's say. Everything I already know basically could be change the opacity, let's say, just to visually show it to 50%. And everything that I don't know will pop out. But that's usually when I read a document. Yeah, that's the part where when I'm interested, because then I'm going to learn something and potentially change my perspective. So yeah, every time is diff between what I know from my perspective based on goals I have in mind, versus what being, let's say, objectively displayed according to the curator. That's usually what I find as interesting. The problem is it's usually rare for us to have externalized this kind of information that we have written somewhere, or that we transform what we've written somewhere as something that can be used by another system. Say if we could on that timeline display, okay, everything that I already know, or those pages maybe from Wikipedia already visited, then hide them a bit, let's say. To me, that would be more interesting.
Yeah, that sounds like a great interaction. I could imagine, if I understand you correct, Fabian, standing in a room, saying this in some kind of a nice way, and if you know something, literally just press it into the floor. Fabian, would you mind sharing the screen and showing your tweet with video? It's really worth discussing.
Sure. So I'll put that out and I'll share my screen. Please let me know when you can see it.
Can see.
Got it.
Okay.
So, this is a random room, let's say a rather cubic kind of room that was work for the European Parliament, and we have an innovation, we call it the Innovate platform, where people post ideas or challenges. And one thing we need to do is from time to time say, okay, that was an interesting idea, or this one was a interesting idea but already exists. So we basically rate them. But sometimes we need to say, oh, this idea is related to that other idea. The problem is everything is stuck, let's say, on a website, whereas if you can transform all those ideas, so we can call them items, as post-it notes or objects you can move around, to me at least that feels nicer. And what I'm showing there when I click on the page is different views of different layouts. So for example, my layout might be different than the one of my colleagues. Maybe they care about how feasible the idea is, whereas other colleagues care about how expensive or whatever. So you can basically, what I'm doing right now is manipulating by hand, let's say. I just go and move it with the VR headset. But then somebody else can also move them either on a line, diagonally, or go back to layout. So the point there, what I wanted to highlight, and based on a previous remark, is you can directly manipulate items, so direct in the sense that you grab with your hand, and you can also manipulate a bunch of them programmatically. Again, known layout, previous layout, horizontal, vertical, whatever you want. And that's all done in Mozilla Hubs, meaning it's collaborative. You can have 5 person in the virtual room, either with a headset or with a desktop. So you can imagine also, instead of using those items, there would be part of a mural or whatever document you can, or set of documents you can visually display.
So a couple of questions. Did you say 5 people?
Yes.
Is that the maximum?
No, I don't remember, but let's say a dozen, but not more, because after this, depends what you put in the room, depends what computers or your headsets people have. But it's definitely not 50.
What about 20?
I wouldn't. I think it's maybe enough, and already inviting people one by one is, especially if everybody has done it before and the room has been, let's say, checked.
Someone at the door. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, or personally, I think, yeah, large groups for workshops, and especially with new tools, I don't recommend it. Like the smaller it can be, let's say half a dozen as we are now, that's usually more interesting because it's so new for everyone.
Sorry, Amazon delivery, it wasn't even for me.
I was saying briefly that in my opinion, workshops, you want a minimum threshold, not just 2 persons, but the less people they are, especially when the medium is new or the content is a bit different, I get better result than, let's say, 20 or even 10 people. That's a lot. Except again, if everybody's familiar both with the topic at hand and with the technology, then that can be fine.
Can more than one person sign in with the same ID, meaning they all stand in the same spot and they cannot do something like spectator mode type thing?
Yes, yes, you can have ghosts or visitors or people that just look around. And those people, then you can add like an audience. Basically, you can add maybe 100. That's quite different. The more involving the interaction model, then the less people.
But they can at least move their heads freely, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So they
So
don't provide any input and nobody see them, but then you can have hundreds.
well, I think that's absolutely fine because this really does work on the web on a normal computer and
Yes.
and in here. But so let's say we have a dream of what we talked about earlier, where on the main wall we have a mural that Bob has curated, let's say, about the conference. And then we have a discussion session so that we have elements that can be moved around based on predefined concepts. And also we can define some concepts live, of course, maybe. Is that feasible or is that just not the way things can be done now?
Yes, it's feasible. And keep adding content basically, and if that content again is just an image, if your text becomes an image, just drag and drop. Like there is nothing technically more complex than this. It's more complex if you want to add, let's say, 10 images and then you want them to have a specific layout. But if you have one document as an image within a PDF, drag and drop, and everybody in the room is going to see it.
Okay, so Bob, what do you think of the challenge of doing something like this and having something to show where hopefully most people will have a headset and will be able to see it properly? Other people will at least see it on their laptop, on the web. Shall we try to do something like this?
I don't think that. Well, I think that something like that would be useful. Do I have the time to do it? No. The 75 to 90% of the work is writing the little summary chunks. Who's going to do that?
I think we can do that together. I think it would be extremely good use of our times together. We could, for instance, please tell me if you agree or not, guys, but maybe even next Friday or Monday, dedicate only that. It'll be similar to what I think you proposed earlier, where you take over the session, Bob. One of us can be a secretary, write down the things. We do maybe something as simple as a Google Doc, or we'll have a Figma login, whatever it might be. And we do the basic, but we do it in this fashion.
It would basically be writing little chunks of little paragraphs. All right, let's put it that way. It's because you don't like chunks. Little paragraphs of information that are important with the title on them.
Yep.
And that are important.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I agree with that. I mean, look, this is how I'm currently viewing it. Glossary. That's
a glossary. Glossary would be a good start. It may be there may be generalizations in there that are the title rather than the name of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I predict there will be. So it's confusing to me, because you said maybe we would do that in the conference, and now you're talking about doing it beforehand, about what the results of the conference are. I'm confused about that.
I think what might be useful is to do the basic upfront, so that when people in a session put their headset on, there's something there. And then we use that session, depending on what level of interactivity we can make possible, to update and change that.
I think it's far too ambitious to try to imagine that being a mural. If we can do the chunks, whatever the chunks of information are, that I'm imagining would be on those little white spaces that Fabian was moving around. And if we can go up close to those and read them, then we've got at least a starter. But that's a lot of things to get people to do. You know, and it depends on what the subject is. That is, the subject or the question or the topic or however one wants to talk about it, is what?
I think that this conversation we're having now really helps elucidate, or whatever it's called, how complicated this is. Because now we're at least pretending we're going to build something, whether we do is secondary. But this conversation shows the question of, what do we put up initially? And what do we want people to do? These are not obvious questions at all. Right? I could imagine in a dream level, everybody's abstracts or short papers will be there. Everybody will be represented. Every presenter will be there as some sort of an avatar. So we will be able to have views of course, that timeline, maybe just a room of people synchron, all these different things. I don't know.
Sorry, I have to go to the door.
Okay. What kind of dreams do the rest of you have about what kind of things should be in the idealized? This is the beginning of a seminar, symposium. Some people had said something. How can we view?
To briefly go on insisting on the mural, especially while Bob is not here. If we look at the poster behind it, just I think having all the rectangles he has as independent image, and the rest as a, so that's, I don't know, let's say 4 dozens maybe, and then the rest as background that would really be a start. And I would guess that's maybe, especially if they are well sorted in the source file. So for example, Illustrator, that might be an hour work or less. And I don't know Illustrator well, but maybe there is even a way to like group all that and like batch export to images. So that, and ideally preserving, let's say, the position, but that might not be such humongous task. That's me naively not knowing the tool, but I would hope there is some quick way to go from that source to something usable as is in VR.
In this Mozilla environment, is it easy to import data from outside?
No, but I know how to do it. So importing data, depends what you need. Drag and drop PDF, very easy, anybody can do it. Importing a batch of 50 images at the right position, not really. But again, I've done it before, so I'm relatively confident that I could do it again.
But what
And
about
hopefully-
what about JSON type stuff? So let's say, for the sake of argument, Mark is, sitting there typing in new stuff and saving somehow. Can that automatically appear as a text or a box in the world easily?
Yes, but you would basically convert it to an image first. The thing is, why is because then you can grab it. So otherwise you can indeed display text. I think I've showed that a couple of months ago, but the text is not interruptible. So it loses a lot of the appeal. But if you convert it to a format like image or even PDF, I think image is best, like a PNG, then it's fine. You can just drag and drop it and then move it around.
That's really interesting, Fabian. Can I just ask, is that, I understand what you said. So is the sort of the need, as it were, to make something into an image so it's interactable, is that would it be fair to say that's in a sense a current limitation of, Mozilla Hubs as it is, or is there something deeper behind that?
Yes, it's a limitation, but I think it's also because it covers 99% of usages, and also usually the object you want to manipulate in VR is a 3D object, like a 3D model of a banana or monkey, whatever you need to play with, but not really image or text. So, but still, most of us know how to generate an image. So that's why you can still extend hubs. So if, for example, you say JSON or LaTeX should be primitive, one could do that. Okay. But I found so far that going from, let's say, whatever format to image and drag and drop of that image there, yeah, that's like way easier because you have usually a conversion from whatever to image on like most formats, especially text related. So that's usually the easiest way, but you can, and some of the things I've been doing, let's say with my cabin weird environment, is to say the primitive should not be an image or a 3D model, but rather text, and that text can be code. But that's not the design decision that Hubs took, and they were right in the sense that for most people, you want to shake a banana or play with a monkey in VR, not with text. So that does make sense.
Thanks. That's actually really useful. That sort of fills in a couple of sort of gaps that have been, or sort of misconnects that have been happening along the way. So that was really useful to know. Thanks.
I'm back. I'm sorry. I had to leave.
Me too.
At my door.
I had to run out too. So if I can summarize, I think what Fabian and Mark was talking about is the bits that are in the boxes on your mural are relatively simple to handle, even if it means some new ones being created on the fly during a meeting. Is that right, Fabian?
Yeah, sure. If we want to add new pieces to it, we can do that during a session. And it can be done either in VR or with somebody else on their desktop that want to be part, let's say, of the meeting and they need to add another document. So yeah.
So what you're saying is that you want that the subject of this exercise, whatever we call it, is going to be this nuclear waste mural?
No, the
Well, that's what I got from your summary. Sorry,
sorry,
I mistaken.
yeah, no, sorry. What I meant to say is the kind of boxes you have behind you. So not necessarily all the arrows and landscape, but you know, still keeping within the concepts and information of the conference and the book. I don't know. What do you think, Bob?
What I think is it would be useful to have some of those boxes in Fabian's environment. Yes. And somebody other than me write them.
Yeah, absolutely. So then what I think we should do is on this Friday, actually, Fabian, when are you going to be next with us? Because I know right now you don't have 100% availability.
I don't know actually, because I'll be taking the train on Friday, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be written in, you know, or composed in Fabian's environment.
No. I just meant since he's here. But also, guys, when looking at the calendar, I just saw that Monday week I'm unable to make it. Can we move the day to Tuesday next week, just once?
It's okay for me.
What are you talking about? The 12th?
Yeah, the 12th, I'm on a plane to Norway. Sorry, it was the only time I could go. From Norway, sorry.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so what for us to do this?
I haven't heard any volunteers to write this stuff.
But so there shouldn't be anything to write. Hopefully, let's say if I look at the poster and it can be saved as an SVG, then there might be a programmatic way to say, okay, if all those rectangles, let's say, are on the same layer, then export all those layers, all those rectangles as individual images.
But hang on,
and then export the background. Yeah.
I think
So
what Bob is talking about.
This illustrates the way that we converse with each other. It seems to me that Fabian was talking about my mural, and it seems that Frode is talking about something, one that is composed next week. Is that right? Am I really even confused about those two things that seem clear to me?
I think you may be correct in that is a misunderstanding. Fabian, I was thinking about having a session where we make a new mural based on the content of the book.
I don't care to put it from a, let's say, prototypist point of view, as long as I get the right data in the end. Can ever be about what you ate last week, it's the same. As long as there is one way to progress or to test, I'm fine either way. So that's also why if for example, I can try with a current poster, then I will be confident that if the next one is done the same way, it will be just replacing it, and that would be, yeah, safer.
Jim, I have a comment, Fabian, but Jim, please go ahead first.
I thought Fabienne maybe 10 minutes ago suggested that Bob's Nyrex background be in the VR space, just like it's in our space today behind Bob. Is that true, Fabienne?
Not exactly. It would be the same, yes, but like as a background without the rectangles, let's say. So just, for example, the colorful bits, the landscape, but not the rectangles. The rectangles would then become interactable elements that people would be able, they would still be displayed in place, then we can imagine grabbing a rectangle and moving it around.
So very specific question to you, Fabienne. Please look at the PDF that I sent the link to. Or actually, you don't even need to do that. Just if you just look at my screen here. Ta-da. Is this formatted enough in PDF, or how do you want it? Because you can also have it in JSON.
To be manipulable.
To put it into different sheets.
Let's say, to simplify, one file equal one item. So if you give me, let's say, 20 PNGs or JPEG, then we will have 20 cards or things to move around. If you give me one, there will be one. So imagine here the idea would be to have one JPEG or PNG per item of the glossary.
Because you can also have it like this.
Yeah.
But you're saying one item. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. We can do that, because what might be useful if we just start with, sorry, everyone.
Just also to clarify, if one of the very first demo I shared to the group was using the, I don't remember the document, but it was some data from, not Reader, but I forgot. But I was transforming basically text to image, and then bringing those images as items to, I don't remember if it was Hubs, but it's a Bureau World. So that would be exactly the same principle. I can't recall the demo, but the point is you can indeed convert whether JSON or another format to image and then batch send the images. The big difference, let's say, between the glossary and the mural is items in the glossaries are not part of a 2D layout. They're just like a list, basically.
Mark, sorry, I've ignored your hand, or is it an old hand?
Oh, no, I've just put in a couple of things in the sidebar, just as a quick test. Ideally, if we can take the as it were, the little text boxes, export them from Illustrator or an SVG or something as they are without any background, ideal. The first thing I did was I literally took a screen grab from the PDF of the mural, but that's a GIF, PNG actually. The second one is I basically copied the same information in Mac Preview, copied it onto the clipboard, made it a new PDF document, which means it should still be vector artwork, and dragged to the desktop. Now, what you can see there is because it's a speech bubble, it's not a fixed rectangle, so there's extraneous information. Now, making lots of those by that method and then trying to rid them will be a big task. It'll take far longer to remove all the crap in the background than it would be, making those images. I was just trying to give a flow of what we can do in the short term. Obviously, if it's possible to get closer to the original Illustrator document and have maybe some script that can export all the original bits we want, the boxes, that would be great. Worst case, with the PDF that I put in the sidebar might get us some of the way, but Fabienne's probably best placed to tell me whether I'm completely up the, talking the wrong thing here.
Mark, are you still talking about my mural?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, we have, but so here we go again.
They're the same thing, Bob. What's being talked about is the mural behind you is the canonical source of all this. In order to have something that can be used in the video space, what people are taking is talking about making a form of deconstructed version of your mural, same content, cut up in a slightly different way to facilitate its creation in VR in the short term. We can't do everything we might want to do in the very short term, but what we're talking about, so it is the same thing. It's the same information being repurposed in a different environment. The problem is, to recap, that as Fabienne has pointed out, and I now understand that whereas I'd kind of copied all the text because I thought that was useful, I was wrong. Actually, what we need is that text really more like a picture as it exists. But ideally, and correct me again if I'm wrong here, we would like it as vector artwork. And for instance, we'd like it, you know, if it's an odd shape, we'd like it without anything in the background. That means that Fabienne or Brenda or someone who's working on this can take that image, overlay it over the fixed picture, such as you're displaying as your background at the moment. Such when you look at it, you may not see the overlay, but when in the VR space, you click on that part of the video, the interaction occurs and is detected by the little picture that's in front. And then we're off to the races in terms of stuff we can do with it. And I'll now probably prove I've misunderstood again, because I see Fabian has his hand up.
No, you understood right. It's just that indeed what Fred mentioned about starting from a new poster, let's say about what the content of the future of text conference or symposium would be, is valid in the sense that we don't have to go through this, let's say, extraction process. We start from a new poster. So I'll just show, because maybe that was not clear. So here you can see, you know, please, when you see my screen. Can you see me moving around?
Yes.
So I'm in a hub's room. Doesn't really matter what it is, but I move around. And what I can do, I think I can copy images, but otherwise I can just drag and drop. So this image was a poster like this. I can drag and drop it, and then I can put it on that wall behind that has a snappable area, let's say. I need to move around. So that's also, it shows we need to organize the room for our usage. The poster is there, but what I can do, and I think maybe that was not hidden, is like, I can add an interesting, so I'm typing here. Let's say one of us might be typing interesting suggestion, and then I can create it as a movable object. So it's text, but I can still put it there. And I can keep on building the poster as is, meaning I have the background, let's say the topic represented, and then I can move to the object as text, but I can grab them, move them around if it was in VR with my hand like this.
Okay, I need to comment now because this is very interesting. Please leave the screen on.
Yep.
So the reason you've been talking about a background is that in the case of Bob's prior mural behind him now, there is, as we've discussed before, a landscape background and there are elements on top of it. To
Yes.
my understanding is that if we in 2D spend some time together as a community, writing boxes of concepts, not you, Bob, you dictate, we do it together, somehow on a screen, that when it comes to when you feel like making, when you choose the scaffolding or the structure for this, once you've seen the basics, that image will go into VR and the manual headings for all the other things will be live text we put in and we can move around on the day. Is that right, Fabian?
Sure.
That sounds
Okay,
pretty cool.
Can you change the text
No.
where it says, you know, any of that? That one, yes.
No, so if I want to change that text, I need
Yeah.
to make it, I need to make, I can destroy this, like I delete it, and then new suggestion.
So you destroyed it? Is that what you said?
Yes, I can delete it, like put it in
You
the
can't
search. I
edit.
can't-
It's not possible to edit.
No,
to put-
because it's not a text anymore, it's an image of that text.
Well, that's you know, that certainly is a constraint for using what we're talking about in a group meeting to do something.
It most certainly is a constraint, Bob, but you know, obviously we are in early days prototyping and it's all a bit hokey, but I can imagine that if we spend 2 hours going through this, the world as it is now, entering the names and the concept. Once we have a live meeting in VR, we don't need to do anything that in depth. It's really, I think, for people to get more of a feel of what it's like to be in an environment for this. I don't know what is. Yeah, so we need to.
Sorry, one other thing, just because it was mentioned earlier, it's a slight tangent to this particular picture, but you'd also mentioned David LeBeau did all that stuff in his highlighter system, basically going through and pulling out effectively quite a lot of metadata about the first 2 books. What I don't know, because I don't have access to his system anymore, is how easily that could just be exported as metadata of some kind, whether it's JSON or just a table of text that we could then go and do stuff with. I don't think there's time to go and learn. Doing it from within his system would not be helpful, and that's not to be disrespectful. There is information. He put a lot of time into doing that keywording, and that might be really quite useful to pull out, and then we could possibly do something with it. But I just don't know how to get at that at the moment.
Okay, thinking.
Please write down the subject of the text that we're going to attempt to write next time. What is the question or the problem or the subject or whatever you want to call it of the text that will be put on the wall there?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I also think it would be great if everyone sends me their own snippets. I will put them into an author document. We can use the map as a workspace, because when we export it, it's really easy to export it as cards, so to speak, that we can use. Does that make sense? Well, we're thinking about that. Okay, yeah. Can we maybe try to work on that together this week, Fabienne? Just make a stable environment for this, because all we need is yeah, so that'll be just a fake background, right? So if we have just a rectangle for this screen, that would work, right?
Ironically enough, I think maybe transforming it to 6 images is better, because otherwise you feel in a sphere, and when you just look at it, it's fine. When you move around, it is not fine. So in my opinion, either we use the image you already have and we take 2 nice photos or 3 photos, front wall, right wall, and ceiling, for example, and we place them roughly, or you go back and you take top quality photo. But otherwise, if we use the 360 as is, I'll do it, and I'm sure you won't feel good about it.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I hear what you're saying, but functionally, what we will have is quite a big rectangle, because we'll probably only work on one wall. Or should we have one wall for scraps, things we don't know where to put right now?
That, in my opinion, that's the interesting part, like the room design, as if you had a physical workshop and you organize it based on the tasks at hand. But I'll put the 360 right now. I'll show you, and you'll see it. It's probably not what you expect.
Mark and Bob, Peter and Jim, would you be able to be here on Friday?
Probably.
Yes.
I should be able to. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes.
Okay, so then we can at least move further with these concept boxes, right? And if you feel like writing anything to me beforehand, I'll share screen while we're waiting for you, Fabian. All I would like to have is this format. I'll zoom in a bit and then I'll pause. I'll just find a good one to stop on. Okay, here we go. For instance, ACM. So we use the normal quote marks, not the fancy typographic ones, because these are easier to parse. That is the definition. Everything, excuse me, that's entirely wrong what I said. This is the term. Everything else is the definition. The new term is what breaks. So you know that all of this is the definition for this. That makes sense, right?
Yep.
And then experimentally, all we have now, unless anybody suggests different, category, colon, institution, person, you know, the basics. Timeline, we have like this. If something is still continuing, it has a dash, that's it. Or, yeah, whatever line. I'm just trying to see, yeah, so this is the way we format the dates. Second, name a month and year, just to keep it consistent. And this is a bit me just making a decision. This is something that we need to talk about at length, but for this one, the timeline is 1960s to 1970s. We don't have a more exact date. So that's the way of doing fuzziness, but you know, that's for a proper discussion. All we need now is some more of these concepts encoded, right?
Just a quick
You know,
one.
we need a subject. We need a subject for what we're going to do.
The subject
We need
is
something of what is going to be, what is important enough for us to write about, and what is important enough for us to show to people at the conference. And we do not have that. We're dealing with the quote marks and things around them when we haven't even discussed that. I'm afraid I get annoyed when we get all into that technical detail. Well, I don't even know what we're doing.
right. Bob, as far as I understand, and as far as I proposed, and I think we agree, is that the subject is the future text volume 3, which is the future of text primarily in VR and with AI. So
where are we going to get that? Where, you know, what do we, you know?
That's,
you know,
I'm answering.
Is it
I'm telling
already?
You.
Okay.
That's what we're supposed to have a session together, hopefully on Friday, where we go through and we discuss what to put up. If people write stuff ahead of time, you know, that's good. But otherwise, we will just write it in a card. Maybe Peter will say billboarding, you know, in VR. That's, you know, as we write billboarding, we write a basic definition. That's it. And the only reason I showed you that formatting is in case somebody feels like writing some beforehand. If you just send that to me.
So what you're saying is we're going to do glossaries? Is that what we're doing? I mean, I'm just trying to understand what it is that you're proposing that we do as a subject.
Yes. I believe what we have decided is that we're going to write.
You haven't asked anybody to decide yet. You've proposed things. There has not been a decision by the group, as far as I can tell. I haven't heard anybody say, this is the exact proposal. Does everybody agree?
Bob,
and if you agree, please raise your hand. You know, I'm sorry. I'm still trying to figure out what it is that we're trying to do.
Okay.
And if it's writing
Bob, stop, please stop. You're going on with a massive complaint again and again. This is based on what you proposed. Okay, a few weeks ago, you offered to go through and curate to make a mural for this group. And then about a week ago, you were annoyed that that hadn't happened. And I said that we weren't ready for it. And that's when we discussed doing one for the symposium based on the working of this group. So I'm very happy now to ask if people want to or don't want to. I thought we were just continuing on that line. What is the feeling in the group? Is this a good way forward, or should we try something different? Absolutely fair question. I'm sorry, I thought we had agreed on it. Peter, starting with you, because you're wearing a yellow shirt.
Do we have to have this screen up like this?
Yes, you can make it. Oh, for crying. Okay. Well, okay. Peter, Jim,
Yeah.
Mark, and Fabienne, can you please tell us if you what you want to do? I didn't really realize there was a disagreement.
You didn't ask.
I can't ask if I don't realize that there's a disagreement. If the, you know,
I got the
it's not.
sense that I got the sense we were groping around to develop an ontology for the kind of content that we want to be manipulating in our VR rooms.
Right. Right.
So
That is what I thought
But
we
my
were doing
understanding
too.
was what we were doing.
So I'll attempt to try to make a suggestion here. There is somewhere, I presume, I don't know, I don't have a handy address for it, but I'm sure I could, if I looked around and I could find it, a volume 3 which has some papers in it. Is that right?
Not quite. I am going to send an email after this meeting. It was something to be discussed to all the presenters, and I just got 3 new presenters during our call here, saying, here is a link to, I'll share it with the group, of course. Here's a link to information on the symposium.
No.
You are requested to send in an abstract or a paper, which they can do, but there are a lot of things already that we, as Peter says.
Wait. Okay, no, yeah. I don't need a huge description. I'm just trying to say, what is it we're going to work from? Are we going to work from on Friday from a bunch of text? Yes or no?
This is what I have so far. This was taken from my thesis, and I'm removing a lot of stuff and I'm cleaning up a lot of stuff. So we have, this is what I think could be the base. Here is an entry for visual meta. I'll show you only one more. Here's Vint Cerf, because he is category person, timeline 23rd of June, 1943 onwards, right? I thought this kind of ontology is what we're working from. That we
I thought we were working from a bunch of documents.
Well, we don't have documents yet, and documents, if we're going to work from documents, we would still have to extract these specific small chunks of information, right? Each box on the mural isn't going to be a huge amount of text. It has to be relatively constrained, right?
So you're going to ask us to create definitions of those or descriptions of those terms that you just was showing. That's what we're working from?
That was,
oh.
Okay. Well,
I would prefer to work from a bunch of text that somebody's already written, because I can then extract an awful lot of it, edit it a little bit, and it becomes a usable chunk of information.
It's not written yet, though. So that means that you don't feel comfortable doing a mural before the symposium, and I think that's fair enough.
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable doing that in a group when we just, when we're trying to create stuff like that. That's not a useful, at least for me, activity.
Okay. Do you want to, what, okay. All right. That's fine. Okay.
No, I'm just trying to clarify because it hasn't been clarified.
Okay. Peter and I shared perspective on this. I think it was relatively clarified. But Fabian, do you want to show us the room so at least we have an idea of the kind of space you were suggesting, please?
Yes, I will share my screen and I put the link in the chat
Thank you.
already just in case. So I think you can see my screen now. So it looks like this, and when you start, it looks, I think. But then when you move, first you're flying a bit, and also as soon as you move away from your start, the room feels gigantic. I'm slowly walking, and then it deforms it. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
So it's, I would argue it's not really usable as is. So if you don't move and you don't mind feeling like a giant, then I think it's okay. It's up to how
Well,
you want to use it, basically.
Okay. Can you, Fabian, I know I probably took the shot from the wrong perspective, but if we imagine that there's only one viewpoint and it's on that bench in front, could the room be set up so that behind the speaker position, there's a huge rectangle that can be used for putting the work on?
Sure. So we can put like this, the media frame, the same thing I showed you before when I snapped an image on the back. And we can have a virtual floor, let's say. But the outside, the side, let's say, would still look like this. I recommend also you give it a go. That's why I shared the link in VR, and you will see how it feels.
Thank you. Yeah, will do. Okay, but in terms of what we're going to do, so Bob, you prefer to work from document sets.
Yeah, and I prefer not to work on a glossary. I prefer to work on what's important here. You know, what are we trying to do? What's the future of academic text in VR or some other subject question, which we have not written down? As far as I know right now, the question is, what are some definitions of some terms currently in virtual reality? That's the question you're asking us to work on Friday. I don't want to do that particularly. I hope somebody does it. It'd be useful.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I think we have a different view of what we mean by glossary. By glossary, all I mean is exactly the same as you have behind you in those information boxes. They're not necessarily
Those
just
are, no, well, then you and I are going to have difficulty communicating.
Well, Bob, let me just explain why. In my world, in author, I have defined concepts. That's what I map out. There is a term and there's a definition. The definition has different attributes. But in order to stay with the traditional environment of printed academic documents, when it's exported, I use the term glossary. Glossary is not a great term. I absolutely do not think it's perfect, but for that purpose. So all I'm saying is, I think the idea is that the stuff which Fabienne was showing can be put on walls is like the yellow boxes you have behind you. Let's not worry about terminology for a second, but functionally it should be the same, right? And the key is probably, hang on, let me just finish. Key is probably that if Peter writes a little box, I write a little box and so on, you will be the one to choose where it goes, what things connect them. You would make it a mural, but we would help you write those little boxes. Yeah, Peter, we're also out of time. See you later.
Okay, bye-bye. See you Friday.
Yeah, see you. Bye. Let's just make sure, Bob, we're on the same page before we unpage. Are we?
I'm going to share my screen if I can. Let's see. How do I do that here? Share screen. Can you see what I'm showing?
Yes.
I showed it the last week,
Yeah.
last time we got together.
May I comment on this screen?
Oh, yeah.
So from my vocabulary, these are functionally the same as what I use for glossary terms, where, for instance, the top left yellow one, definitions is the term, and everything in the yellow box is the definition. Same goes because all of these boxes have a heading, except for that guy. His speech bubble doesn't, but that's okay. That could be treated in a different way. So that's all I'm saying, that we can build these elements and you choose how they go together. Of course, we build them collectively, but we can, as a community, start populating this. Actually, Mark, as a translator who really understands Bob's work, how do you think that fits?
Well, I mean, I understand. I can sort of map it from both ends. I can see in my mind's eye the picture you showed earlier of what you were describing as a concept or a glossary term, and effectively the bit that was in bold in straight double quotes is definitions, for sake of argument, in the top corner. All the stuff inside the yellow filled box is the definition of that, and there's other metadata which we may define for use in things like timeline and categories and things that wouldn't necessarily be shown in this box, but would be available to Bob as the artist, if I may put it that way, in terms of basically to guide the artist as to how and where they want to put that. Does that sound like a reasonable retelling?
It doesn't to me, because I think of myself as a synthesizer, not as an artist.
My apologies, my profuse apologies. But well, as a synthesist, as a synthesizer, does that make sense? So the only thing that you were seeing when Freud was showing you his what he was referring to as concept of glossary at the time was some of the text, i.e. what in this example is in the yellow box. Some of it is there to inform where something might go on the screen, because it has a date to it, or it has a particular category. But otherwise, broadly, each of the objects that he was talking about, and which people might be providing in textual form, would effectively have a title and some text.
Now, Bob, and a really important point of agreement, which I was wrestling with earlier today, the green one here, unsolved problems. I think it is very, very important that we have a way to assign to these different boxes why they're purple, green, and yellow, and so on, because it has meaning in your system. So I have absolutely no problem at all within the quote unquote definition of terms. We can have type of textual component : unsolved problems. What you have here is not something to ignore or throw away or keep as a graphic. It has real semantic meaning. And I think we should try to support that.
Good. All right. I think we're in agreement about that.
Fantastic.
Now,
it's 13 past. We have 2 minutes, Bob. Can we finish this in 2 minutes?
show me your show. I got to get rid of my screen. How do I do that? I get rid of it.
You have.
Oh, okay, good. Then show me the scatter plot or whatever, all those topics again. No, don't get the lines out of there. How would you describe, what title would you give to all of these together as to why they're important?
Your sound's gone, Fred.
What's happening?
I think he's just trying to get his sound back.
Oh,
It's
okay.
probably going to the wrong window.
How about now? Sound back?
Yes, sound is back.
Okay. Yeah, no, sorry, I was trying Fabien's room. I think that took the audio. Right. So I'm not suggesting this will be the real thing, but what this is supposed to be is a map of what happens from manuscripts to published documents. And as you can see here, it goes into what is in the document, what the capabilities we want were, what the systems are. And over here, of course, on the left, we have a lot of what has been inspired by Doug. So this particular view is of how we're augmenting a document. So I look forward to deleting a lot of these, which I still haven't done, and adding a lot more, which are of how to read in VR, for instance, what problems we're trying to solve, the difference between an academic document and a commercial room, a lot of the things we have discussed.
Those topics are not, I understand you haven't put them on there, and how would we know what those topics would be?
Well, this is not a mural. This is a different kind of thinking space. So in this case, text that is italic, I have used as a heading, for instance, for this section, right? So obviously this doesn't have the graphical background that you would provide to make this into a coherent.
No, it's not the background. It's not the background. It's what, it's what it is that's important here that we're trying to communicate to people.
Yeah, well, this is the dialogue we would have together, right?
And which I understand, which you said was, and we didn't write. Nobody wrote it down, and I didn't write it down. So it's very hard to have this, to even refer to it. But what you're suggesting is that we write a bunch of chunks that describe how a manuscript, how ideas get into manuscript, get into some kind of digital publication. Is that what you're suggesting?
That is what I've been working on my own. I think what we should do as a community is write the different aspects of how text in VR can really augment how we work. What's the point of this? And there are a lot of things we will then exclude. We're probably not going to look at a lot of commercial environments and stuff like that.
Wait. You made a proposal. Will somebody please write it down so that we can then discuss it?
Okay.
I mean, otherwise we're off on some other topic before 2 minutes go by. You're proposing a topic, and I've already, I didn't know that's what you're going to do, and so I didn't write it down.
The topic is really the book and the symposium. It's how text can augment our work in VR.
Okay, text.
We all agree on that topic, right? That's basically it.
Will everybody who disagrees please raise their hand?
So I'm lost as to what I'm voting on.
Yeah, all right, exactly.
But Bob was asking for the idea for us coming together to create a mural, what that mural subject should be. And he asked me for my proposal. I'm proposing how text can augment our work in VR. That's the mural. you know,
Okay, so we're generating basically a complete new data set.
yes.
Is what okay, right. I mean, I understand that it's a bit short notice to do that, but you know, to have something for a couple of weeks' time. But yes,
Yeah,
I understand it as an idea.
Well, I'm not saying we're going to cover absolutely everything, but I really think that the exercise here is a little bit trying to get a decent set of data down, but so that on the day people can explore it in VR, and then afterwards we spend some time based on what we have learned. We will add to it. Yeah, see you later, Fabian. We'll be wrapping up there any second now as well. So, I mean, is there another
my this shows how it is, how important it is and difficult it is to get even something started. And I'm not sure that I would like, you know, and this kind of question is a good sort of beginning question, although I find that the questions change over time and that one has to write them down in order to even begin to think about what it is we might be asking the group to do. I haven't seen anybody volunteer, by the way. Haven't seen anybody volunteer to write these things.
Yeah, but Bob, it's not a matter of one person sitting down and just writing the definitive truth there. It's about each of us writing some of the concepts that we feel comfortable with, coming together in a group, putting it on the table, discussing them, and you know, and doing that. I mean, like the big important actual murals you have done, you weren't just given one definitive written answer for that, right? It was also a process. How is that different from this being a process?
You're right.
But I did have more time, which is a concern here.
What?
It did have more time, and that's not meant as a negative observation.
Yeah.
I mean, one challenge I think to have discussion does take time. So to actually go through and triage and and recompose items is actually quite time consuming, especially if it's done with lots of people present. That's just, I don't think that ever gets any easier because that's a natural part of things. And that's not again, it's not a negative observation, but it's just thinking pragmatics of what we're discussing. So if we want to get to the end point of this before future of text, I would say that's a pretty steep hill to climb.
Well, that being the case, you know, I'm looking at the question. I've written it down. I hope you have. What is our work mean here? What does augment mean here?
Are you writing that as questions or are you asking us?
I'm asking you. Because this is the process, you know, before one goes ahead, before I go ahead, I have to decide whether this is a worthy use of my time.
Yeah, but also talking of use of time, we're half an hour over our allotted time today. So that's difficult. But I mean, as Mark points out, that there isn't a huge deadline for this. You know, this was inspired by what you said a week or so ago about, you know, what happened to your offer about doing this for the group. But if we can't do it, we can't do it. But I do think we should consider at some session of the Future of Tech Symposium, put on a headset, look at stuff on a wall, it can be moved around. Oh, it actually reflects what we're working on. Let's all bring together some ideas for how to improve it in the future. That isn't necessarily the only nor best way to go.
Yeah.
But okay, well, let's meet again on Friday, and then we will see how we how we choose to go on with this or not.
Okay.
Any final comments or questions or observations or anything? All right, see you Friday.
No.